Thank you, Susan. Thank you, audience. Thank you, Claire Benenson, for your generous support. Thank you all for taping the Democratic debate tonight. I really am honored that we have such a good crowd. It is wonderful to be on stage at the 92nd Street Y tonight for me in particular because my academic life, if you could call it that, began right here when I was a student at the nursery school. While I'd like to say Mrs. Rosenthal, the head of the school, could see I really had what it took, in those days I think the admissions criteria were rather lax. If you wanted to go, you could go. Then my own science experiments, what I refer to as my children, exhibits A, B, and C, named, as you can gather, as I am wont as a Jewish mother after my ancestors, A, B, and C, attended the Y nursery school when it was said it was almost as hard to get into the Y than it was to get into Harvard. But you know how parents exaggerate. Tonight, you're going to meet 4 dynamic women who have followed in Hannah Gray's footsteps. They all lead institutions that have been presided over by men, and 2 of them are the first women to lead their schools. Now, women presidents, these women who you're going to meet tonight, all know one another, but in the civilian world, we haven't had the pleasure of the company of these 4 fantastic women presidents, and it's a very selfish pleasure for me because I have a million questions I want to ask them, and I'm sure you do too. Before we leave the shock of women leading these wonderful schools, did you feel that you had to prove something to a board or to a decider that a man would not have had to have proven?
So I'll just give you a letter that was repeated over and over again, including in the New York Times, that was written in the Princeton Alumni Weekly when Shirley, after being announced president, her first major appointment was me as provost. And an alum wrote, "Now that Princeton has a female president and provost, it might as well become an all-girls college."
Yeah.
I mean, you don't have to prove anything. You just have to look and say, what planet is this person living on to write this?
Yeah.
So it's important for us to recognize how far we've come while we work to get further along and realize that there's still a lot to prove. Mm-hmm. There's a lot to prove.
But I also think we have to put it in context, which I know you would agree with because we've talked about this, that there are lots of different groups making their way into. So my favorite Princeton story was when I was first there, my first round at Princeton, and had just gotten tenure and was giving a lot of talks for Princeton alumni and went to the Princeton Alumni Club in New York City, and hopefully this person isn't sitting in this audience, and saw my father for drinks beforehand, and I said, "Dad, I'm really worried. This is the class of 60-something, and they've been writing to the Princeton Alumni Weekly about these women faculty, and they're going to, I don't know, they're not going to want to listen to me." And he said, "Don't worry. They're going to be more worried about you being Jewish than they're going to be worried about you being a woman." And indeed, I got up to give my talk, and the chair of that class got up to introduce me and said, "We're here to welcome Professor Kaplan from Princeton." And somebody said, "No, her name is Cantor." And he said, "They're all the same." And it was the most relaxing evening I've ever had. Because at that point I thought, okay, doesn't matter that I'm a woman at Princeton.
Right.
There are other things here that. So I do think that we have to really think about mobility and access and the changing
prejudices
nature
go together. They really do.
Gender is one piece of the changing landscape of all our institutions over time.
But I think it's also important to recognize these aren't just like the bad old days stories.
Right.
Because in my job at Brown, when I look at it, and I actually wrote down the numbers, I've hired a lot of senior people. They've turned out to be half men and half women. And alumni, people come up to me all the time and they say, you only hire women, right? And it's this idea that they're seen as exceptional. Those are different hires than the male hires, and that's still a way that people think. It's kind of sad.
Yeah. One last thing before we move
And that's when we'll know when it changes, when that kind of thing doesn't happen. When
this program doesn't have to exist anymore.
There's something called a tipping point.
We're not going to live that way.
No, we can always, we can work for it. We can work for it.
She's always been the optimist.
Right,
I would like to point out.
We work for the time when you hire minorities, women, and it isn't seen as, oh my gosh, this is, what are you, you must be discriminating.
Ladies, I wish we could talk all night, but I've been given the big
We have to watch the
heave-ho.
debate.
Yeah, so final question, lightning round. Which is better, Phoenix University or Trump University?
I have no clue.
Well, I think
you'd be like,
Trump
I have two
University
heads.
might be better because I don't think they're getting any federal funds for financial.
Okay.
I said,
Well said. Well said.
I want to thank Chris Paxson, Biddy Martin, Amy Gutmann, and Nancy Cantor, Kaplan, whatever your name is. And thank them for giving us this night in New York. Thank you for being so down to earth and real. And thank you all for
thank you all.
wonderful
Thank
evening.
you.